got one!
Yay? I'm not sure what we got, but anywho, welcome to part 14 of Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric, and oh look over there! It's Fastidious Beaver! A character from the show!
Well, step right up. You must be the hedgehog I've been hearing so much about. Nothing goes on in my town without me knowing about it.
Not everyone here is a hedgehog.
Yeah!
Yes, I don't really care. What I care about is making the people happy. People love races. Do you want to try the great mystery race?
Why do they call it a mystery race? What's mysterious about it?
Great question, son. I have no idea. They never explained it.
Not sure this is a good idea.
Look, people love races. They make them happy. And what do happy people do? They vote for me. I'll make it interesting. Let's see if you can beat my time. So how about it?
Well, how many times can we help you get elected? What do we get out of it?
Come on here, help me out. I don't have a hanging chance of winning without your help. Look, you guys complete 3 laps before time runs out, and I'll give you a scarf. You seem to like them. Oh, and also this thing.
Sonic, that's a power glyph.
Okay, we'll do it. But for the power glyph.
Great, let's get this party started. No way you beat my time. Ready, set, vote! Go.
Oh, that Fastidious Beaver, he is a card. He is also voiced by Mike Pollock, who is also the voice of Dr. Eggman, in case you couldn't tell by his voice. But yeah, folks, we are doing one final side quest to get the final power glyph, and that means we have to partake in this mystery race. We have to beat Fastidious Beaver's time, and, well, there is no actual time limit. No, really, you just have to go through the rings 3 times in a row, and then no matter how slowly you're going, you're bound to beat this, and you're going to get yourself a power glyph. If there is a time limit, well, there's no numbers on screen to indicate that. Every time I've ever seen a Let's Play, or I've done a playthrough myself, I've always had, like, stumbles where I would miss a jet stream and I'd have to circle around and stuff, and I still beat the thing no problem. You know, I can't really imagine Fastidious Beaver actually running alongside the water. I can't imagine him and his short, stubby body hitting the jet streams, jumping off the ramps, hitting all of these rings in rapid succession. So I imagine he must be swimming very, very slowly in order to get this time. And what audience is watching this? The audience loves races, don't you know? Well, there's nobody here, Fastidious Beaver. So there's nobody watching us. So I'm just kind of running laps for no real reason whatsoever. This side quest is kind of pointless. And it is pretty easy to actually overshoot when you're falling into rings, to miss them completely, and then you have to sort of circle around in the water, hit the jet stream again, just so you could go and get another chance to fall into the middle of these rings. But, yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Running through rings, that's totally what I want to do in a Sonic game. I mean, I know we collect them, but still.
Hooray! Vote Beaver! You won! Vote Beaver! You've done it!
We did our part. How about that glyph?
And that's it, folks. That is the final power glyph. We are done with the side quests. We have met every single NPC that this game has to offer, and this is going to be our final time, yes, our last time ever, in Bygone Island. We're moving on to the final set of levels. We are getting to the end of Rise of Lyric. The playthrough is ending this week, and then I could finally take my summer break at long last. But yeah, this is it. Bygone Island. Styx's ring is still there. She was originally standing next to the door, and that ring never really goes away. It just hangs there forever, because, I don't know, this game wasn't polished very well. But I have 150 crowns, which means I can get the Tier 4 upgrades now. Keep in mind, there's a whole bunch of crowns I can collect in the later levels that I'm going to. So there are plenty of crowns you can miss out on and still get all of the max upgrades just from playing through the whole game once or twice. And, well, most people aren't even going to try playing it twice, but these upgrades aren't all that important anyway. I'm not getting Tier 4 of the Secret Stash or the Ring Magnetism, so whatever. Well, Styx, You gonna say something now? Nothing? Nothing at all, eh, Sticks? Alright, see you in Shattered Crystal. See you in that future Let's Play that we're gonna do. But yeah, when you check the map, it tells you to go to one of the towers on the beach area, and you just drag the crystal to it. You know, we're collecting all of these crystals, which open all these gates, and you have to imagine these were built by the ancients, the people who Lyric was a part of 1,000 years ago. And you think, like, through the story, we must be uncovering some kind of great treasure. I mean, every single crystal leads to the next crystal, which leads to the next crystal, which leads to the next crystal, which opens the next gate. And that must mean we're getting to some fancy treasure. We must be finding some amazing technology that the ancients hid through all these crystals because it's such advanced technology. And that's not where the plot is going at all. We are going to the Sky Citadel, and there is nothing in the Sky Citadel other than the final crystal. And once we get the final crystal, well then, we run into Lyric. Let's just say that, because you'll remember we had a little bit of a cliffhanger at the very beginning of part 1. They had a little teaser of things to come. We're finally catching up to that moment.
Whoa, cool.
Come on, guys.
What happened?
It must have been designed to only take 2. But don't worry, I've got a plan. A floating city. This is incredible.
Look at this place. I have to say, it's pretty amazing.
Careful, falling object.
As long as one of them is not us, I'm okay.
Here's a bounce pad.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for pointing out that that was, in fact, a bounce pad. I'm so glad that throughout the entire playthrough, you just keep pointing out that that's a bounce pad. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Amy. You're so observant. I can't wait to hear about it in the next part, too.
The laser can't reach the door. Let's get rid of that thing in the way. That worked. The door's opening now.
Wait, it worked? I was right?
Yes, you were.
That's awesome! Make a note. Tell Sonic this story when you see him.
This is a very cool place.
Lasers. Why'd it have to be lasers?
We're too close to give up now.
I never give up. Hedgehogs give up. Echidnas don't. Ever. Never, ever, ever.
More showing me, less telling me.
Keep pumping in jokes. Just keep saying joke after joke after joke. Make Knuckles do an Indiana Jones impression. Make him be Harrison Ford. Come on, just keep on with the jokes. Again, a TV show can edit their jokes rather well. They can pace them out. They can have good timing. They can have lots of payoff to a lot of scenes with the good camera views and all this other stuff. But with a video game, it's kind of harder to sell the comedy. Video games in general have a problem selling comedy. Not every video game has been great at being really, really funny, but, you know. Anyway, we have to open this big door that's in the way, and we need to get rid of all these blocks that are covering a whole bunch of lasers. Who put the blocks there? A wizard did it. I don't know. But you destroy the blocks, you'll expose the lasers, and then they'll bounce into the crystals and open the door for you. And these platforms right here, some of them crumble, some of them don't. And it's pretty obvious to tell which ones do crumble because they're the ones that are horizontal and not glowing. The vertical ones glow. They are pointing in the direction of which your path is going. The horizontal lines are not pointing where you're going, and they don't glow, so you just know not to step on them, and you'll be fine, you know. Kids can play this just fine and figure it out no problem, because this game holds your hand the entire way through. It practically plays itself. It's not that big of a deal. But, you know, I still find this pretty soothing. I still find this pretty relaxing and enjoyable. I like these slower-paced moments in Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric where, you know, we're not going to be fighting enemies for a good 5-10 minutes or so. We're just going to be platforming and setting up all of these lasers and dodging all these ball spikes and stuff. And that's actually pretty fun to me. You know, I grew up in an era of PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. I grew up in an era of platformers, you know. I've played my Pac-Man worlds, my Banjo-Kazooies, my Pitfalls. Insert platformer here, I have probably played it at some point in my life. And anyone who knows this channel knows that, you know, I'm a big platformer guy. I did a playthrough on Banjo-Kazooie and Pac-Man World and The Hobbit and stuff like that. You know, I live for timing presses. I live for making sure I jump at the right time so that I don't fall into the pit, so I don't run into spikes, so I feel like an athletic badass, you know? It's why I enjoy Mario games so much. I'm a big platformer guy. So when I play stuff like this section where I'm just moving a whole bunch of lasers and trying to open doors and stuff, and I don't have to worry about enemies, I don't have anything to complain about here. This is fine, you know? It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it's not like torture. That's the thing that always gets me. It's like every time leading up to Rise of Lyric, people were always like, oh man, Clement, why would you torture yourself with this game? Why would you torture yourself with this god-awful game? Are you a masochist? How could you do this to yourself? You must have a pain threshold that is super, super high. And it's just like, this isn't even hard, man. Rise of Lyric's one of those games that just, I have no difficulty playing whatsoever. Because, like, when I think of, like, the worst games ever, some of the most awful, frustrating experiences I've ever had with a video game, you know, I'm thinking of stuff that, like, make me backtrack a whole bunch, make me go through lots of loading times, unfair platforming segments that just, like, are filled with bullshit spikes and bullshit enemies and trial and error stuff that are just so frustrating to the point that I'm like losing my mind, you know? And I don't have that experience with Rise of Lyric. I have like the opposite experience. I think it's pretty easy. I think that this is made for really young children. I think this is made for a much younger audience than the 20-something man-children that make up that make up a lot of the Sonic fan base who are expecting something more hardcore and intense, you know? And yes, I insulted the Sonic fan base. That's exactly what I said, yes. God.
I'm gonna go this way.
But, you know,
Do not
I always get, like, criticism, like, how could you recommend children playing Rise of Lyric? How could you say, like, little kids would enjoy Rise of Lyric? Like, that's so insulting to children, Clement. That's so insulting to their intelligence. You must think very little of children, because I know what they would like, and I know that they would hate this, because I, a 20-something person, hate this, so I know that my 5-year-old nephew would definitely hate this. Look, guys, I babysat a lot of kids in high school. I babysat kids every now and then. I have nephews. You know, my cousins all have kids nowadays. And I always see them at Thanksgiving. I always see them at Christmas. And I always see the kind of games that they like to play. My nephews love Traveler's Tales, Lego Batman. You know, I've seen them play stuff like VVVV on the Nintendo 3DS. I've seen them play all kinds of weird kids games and iOS mobile phone games that I had never heard of, you know?
We have 2 ways to go. Thoughts?
I see 2 paths, both dangerous. You decide.
Right it is.
Okay, let's do this.
And it's like, you know, I see Rise of Lyric's gameplay, and it holds your hand the entire way through. It's not the most challenging thing in the world, but for like a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old kid, it's just going to be kind of thrilling to vicariously live out the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, to be walking through jungles and running through loop-de-loops and fighting robots and beating them up, because, you know, what kid doesn't like a good beat-em-up? What kid doesn't like a Streets of Rage, a Scott Pilgrim, a Final Fight when they're growing up? I was a kid once upon a time, you were kids once upon a time, and Final Fight was not exactly a deep combat system compared to Rise of Lyric, now was it? There was no dodge roll in Final Fight, you didn't have an enter beam in Final Fight and stuff, and those games kicked my ass when I was a kid, you know? I would never beat Final Fight until, like, I got really, really old, because you had limited continues and limited lives, and after a while, my Cody, my Mike Hager, just couldn't take the abuse, and I would just like constantly fail over and over and over again. And you know, this game has infinite lives. You respawn immediately when you die. I know my nephew's playing Lego Batman like that because they don't have to backtrack through stuff. They don't have to redo lots of stuff. They don't get frustrated and bored with certain games. And I have an interesting anecdote for the people who are saying you should recommend Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic Mania. Well, who's to say I don't? Who's to say I don't recommend those games to kids? But you know, I do have an interesting anecdote about the time I saw my nephews play Sonic Mania not too long ago, which actually ties into a lot of my childhood experience with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. We were playing Sonic Mania, right? And my nephews got to the very boss of Green Hill Zone, which is the Death Egg robot. And that was actually the first time I discovered that the legs don't actually damage you in that fight. You can walk where the Death Egg robot's legs are, and you don't actually take any contact damage. But you still take contact from the spikes, and every time you try to hit Eggman from behind him, the character would always like bounce forward into the spikes. So if you tried bouncing into the back of the robot with no rings, then you were going to propel yourself into spikes, and you were going to die. And you know, my nephews didn't really find a lot of one-up boxes along the way. They had like maybe 3 or 4 lives going into that fight, and they kept running into the spikes, and they kept misplacing the rings, and they weren't collecting the rings, and then they died to the spikes. Or they just let this thing chase them long enough, and then the pathway ended, and they fell into the crumbling hole because Eggman, you know, trapped them. And they got a game over on that fight. They got a game over on the Death Egg fight, and they weren't having fun with that, and they asked me to beat the boss for them. Again, they're like 5 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, right? And so I do beat the Death Egg robot the second time around when we get back to that fight. And then we get to Chemical Plant, and the same thing that happened to a lot of my friends when I was a kid playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 happened to my nephews. What happened was we got to the underwater part of Chemical Plant, which is in Act 1 of Sonic Mania. And it's actually harder in Sonic Mania because it's a shorter set piece in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. They made it a little bit taller in Sonic Mania, right? And what happens is they get underwater, and then, you know, they're starting to drown, and then the music kicks in, and they keep falling in between the platforms. They're not climbing it fast enough. And eventually I got them past the one point where you have to climb the blocks that are moving, rotating back and forth, and they finally get to the top. But now they have to deal with a tiny platform over a body of water, and they have to watch out for the platforms that when you stand on them, they fold out, and then you fall back into the water again. And when you fall back into the water again, most players, even adult veteran players of Sonic like me, might have a little bit trouble getting back up just because it's such a high climb, and you have to get all the way back up, and you can't really make a misstep. And my nephews died to Chemical Plant, and they died to Chemical Plant, and they died to Chemical Plant, and then they quit. They quit. They said that they didn't want to play this anymore. They wanted to play something else. They wanted to play Mario Kart 8. They wanted to play Lego Marvel Avengers, because I owned a copy of Lego Marvel Avengers on my Wii U. They got tired of Sonic Mania, and they didn't want to play it anymore. But they played Lego Marvel for felt like an hour and a half, just because they weren't dying, you know? They were being Iron Man, they were being the Incredible Hulk, they were being whoever in that game, and they were still just getting through the level just fine, and they were solving the puzzles, and I was trying to help them with the puzzles and stuff. And so you never really know how a kid is going to react to certain games. Sonic Boom is certainly not a game I can recommend for teenagers. It's not a game I can recommend for adults. And yes, while it does have lots of janky elements and a bad frame rate, there's nothing here that's like super offensive to me that like, oh man, the boss fights are terrible. Like, this isn't like any of the bosses in this game can be compared to, say, a Silver the Hedgehog fight or an Iblis Phase 2, for example. You know what I'm getting at, but still, I don't think that Rise of Lyric is horribly designed. I think a kid can still enjoy this just fine.
So good of you to join us. Once I knew you had the map, all I had to do was sit back and wait while you collected all my crystals for me. Now, hand them over.
Not gonna happen, Snake Breath.
Really? Let's see what your friends think.
Guys, don't do it! We can take them!
Okay, Lyric, we gave you what you want. Let him go.
I have a better idea. Our unfinished business is finished.
Don't just stand there. We got a snake to catch.
Whew! You know, I thought I lost my sidekick.
Uh-huh.
All that build-up, and nothing really happened to Sonic. At the beginning of part 1, it makes you think like Sonic gets killed, and then it's like yesterday, and everything is leading up to this moment. You know, we're coming back to this moment that happened in part 1, and all those explosions, all those lasers that fired at Sonic, I just got buried by some rubble. He's fine. You'd think he would have died or something, and then we would have used the all of the shattered crystals, all the crystals that we've been collecting up to this point to, like, revive him or something. But no, that's not the case. Sonic's fine. Great story, Lyric. Very good storyline. Your writers are impeccable. The story's a bit of a mess. A bit of a mess, if I do say so myself. Clement, how could you recommend this game to kids when the story's so bad? Yeah, I agree. Mario Odyssey has the deepest lore. It's so deep that Bowser's having a wedding and you have to save the princess again. Again, it's about vicariously living out the experience of being Sonic and beating up robots. Sometimes the story doesn't really matter. And there's this idea that, like, okay, so you just recommend anything to kids. No! There's plenty of Sonic games I wouldn't recommend to kids, you know? And you're going to find this a little surprising. Most people say Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal is the better game between Rise of Lyric and it. And certainly it has more of a 2D action feel to it, but you know, it's a little hard to recommend for kids when you consider that, like, you need to collect every single thing in those levels. In Shattered Crystal, you need to get every single crystal in order to get one emblem. You need to get every single blueprint in order to get one emblem. So if you get 4 out of 5 crystals, if you get 4 out of 5 blueprints, well, then you can't progress. You can't go to future levels, and I can't imagine a kid having fun with that. I actually wouldn't recommend Shattered Crystal to kids, because I don't think any kid wants to deal with that. They just want to barrel through and go through levels and have fun. And, you know, Rise of Lyric doesn't have a gatekeeping system like that. Rise of Lyric isn't like, oh, sorry, you didn't get 20 or so crowns. You're not allowed to go to this next level. No, you can skip the crowns. You can skip the scrap metal boxes. All that's required is that you beat the levels and beat the rather simple bosses who you can't really die to that much because, again, the game's difficulty is not that high. And most of them are like 3 minutes long and not the most complicated things in the world. I think the hardest part of the game for kids in Rise of Lyric is just going to be the Metal Sonic fight, but everything else they can handle at their pace if they're not really familiar with video games all that much, you know? Like Sonic Lost World for 3DS, I wouldn't recommend that to kids, because, like, that game is filled with bad levels, with bad gyro controls where they have to stand up all the time, and if they're on a school bus or something, you know, that's not exactly preferable for every single kid, especially if you have a handicapped child. How are you supposed to do the gyroscope levels with a handicapped child? You know, the Frozen Factory level, I don't think they'd have fun with. All the intense difficulty of Lost World 3DS, you know. I'm not saying hard games can't be played by children, but I am saying that it's harder to recommend a kid, hey, do you want to play Skyroad 2? Because I'm sure you'll have lots of fun failing and failing and failing again because the asteroid wisp keeps draining on you every time you're playing Skyroad 2, you know? I can't recommend Lost World 3DS to kids. Sonic Chronicles, you know, I can recommend Mario RPG to kids because that's a good first-time beginner RPG for children. Sonic Chronicles is not a good game for children when it comes to RPGs because that's a game where it's like, okay, you have to use certain abilities on the SWAT bots here, and you start off the fights, and you're missing every single attack. Like, you fight the first few, like, bug monsters in Green Hill Zone, and it's miss, 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 miss. And a kid's just gonna be confused. And those POW attacks, where you can't screw up one action, for like a 5 to 10-year-old, you can't screw up any of those DS stylus minigames, otherwise the effect wears off. That's a terrible game for kids. I couldn't imagine a kid making that their first RPG. And maybe it has happened in the comments section. I pity you. I'm sorry that was your first RPG. It's a terrible game. But, you know. I remember just seeing so many bad games for kids, and some of the things I think about when I'm recommending games for children, I think about, like, Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo was one of the biggest movies of like 2004, 2003, whenever that movie came out. And it was on the GameCube, and this girl I was babysitting named Marissa, she got Finding Nemo because she was a big fan of the movie. And that game had some of the most insufferable, awful, terrible loading times I've ever seen in a video game, where like, I asked her, oh, what's this game? You like Finding Nemo? And she goes, no. I'm like, why don't you like Finding Nemo? And she goes, it's too slow. It's so boring. You don't do anything. And I was like, okay. So I actually put it in the GameCube, and the load times in Finding Nemo for the GameCube are atrocious. They go on for like a minute to a minute and a half sometimes when you're waiting for a level. And it's also like a watered-down, lame version of Echo the Dolphin. And I already knew tons of kids who didn't like Echo the Dolphin just because of the 2D water kind of physics stuff going on in that game, but Finding Nemo is a bad game for kids. I can't recommend Finding Nemo to kids, you know? I think about these things when I recommend games to children. And Rise of Lyric, for this game that is supposedly one of the worst games ever, one of the worstest things to ever happen to ever, you know? People want me to compare this to Sonic 06 and Superman 64 and all the worst games you've ever heard of and stuff. But I think this game plays itself pretty nicely, you know? The combat, there's no real stakes with the combat. Even if you suck with the enter beam, even if you suck at dodge rolling, even if you're constantly losing your rings and getting smacked around, you just respawn, and then you continue the fight. Whatever. That's just like any Traveler's Tales Lego game. Kids could get into that if it's one of their first ever video games, you know? The boss fights are simple, the speed sections and the puzzles, like the puzzle platforming and stuff, you know, you just pull stuff with enter beams, you just destroy any block that's in your way. It's not the most complicated stuff puzzle-wise. For an adult or a teenager, this game is pointless to play. It's so easy and it's so made for a much younger audience, clearly. But for children, look, I'm sorry, I'm gonna die on this hill. I think children can enjoy Rise of Lyric just fine. Yeah, it's jank. Yeah, it has weird frame rate issues and stuff, but I still think a 7-year-old could enjoy this just fine. And I'm sure lots of 7-year-olds were posting on Miiverse about how much they enjoyed Rise of Lyric back in the day. So sorry. I'm gonna call this part, won't somebody please think of the children? That's what I'm gonna call this part. But, you know, I just want you to go into my mindset. Go into my mindset of why it's really hard for me to consider this one of the worst games I've ever played. It's really hard for me to be like, oh, this is such a painful experience for me to play. This is so insufferable of a video game. It's not insufferable. Whatever. I still maintain that for me, for adult 30-year-old me, Rise of Lyric is a boring, forgettable, been there, done that. I've played a lot of platformers that are better than this, and I can name 1,000 platformers that are better than Rise of Lyric. I'm not saying that, like, okay, if a kid wants to play Crash Bandicoot, give it a shot. Let him play Crash Bandicoot. It may be hard, but you should give it a shot, because it's a really fun game when you get used to the controls, and the music's fun, and, you know, Crash Bandicoot should be really fun for a kid. And I still think it's a way better game than Rise of Lyric, you know? I think Sonic Mania is a way better game than Rise of Lyric, but I can understand why children might have an easier time with Rise of Lyric than Mania. I know that's heresy to some of you. But have you ever considered how challenging the Green Hill Death Egg boss is and Chemical Plant Act 1 is for, like, a 5-year-old who's not good at video games? Like, Sonic Mania can be pretty challenging. It is a pretty challenging game for the youngings, you know? The younglings, whatever. And I don't know. I just wanted to address this point because I always get grief about that. Oh, recommending games for kids. How could you recommend this to children? You must hate children. You must not think well of them. Dude, I've seen kids play a lot of garbage games that they liked. I was a kid myself, and there were plenty of garbage Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis games that I liked. That when I go back as an adult, I think, wow, this isn't as good. This hasn't held up as much as I think it has. But it's like the only thing you play, you know? I grew up with Bubsy. I had a copy of Bubsy for the Super Nintendo growing up as a kid, and I played the hell out of that thing so much that I still remember the music. I still remember so many of the one-liners in that game. And I can't recommend Bubsy to kids nowadays. That game is, like, ridiculous hard with the one-hit difficulty and the fact that you run really fast and you constantly run into stuff, which is one-hit kills, that you can't see coming all the time. But I grew up with Bubsy. I grew up with Bubsy, you know? And when you grow up with Bubsy, how can you call Rise of Lyric terrible when compared to that? I'm sorry.
Window seat, please.
How did we get stuck with the exit row?
Won't somebody please think of the children? I don't know why I ranted about that for this entire video, but, you know, I just want people to get where I'm coming from when I describe it as a mediocre to below average game that I would give a 4 or 5 out of 10 score to, and why I don't find this to be such a torturous experience. It's a reason I did a Let's Play of it instead of a Let's Look, because I want to show you the game that everyone thinks is the worst thing ever. I want to show you the levels in action, and it might be boring, but is it really awful? Is it really one of the worst things you've ever seen ever, you know? That's what I'm trying to get at, and in part 15, I'm just going to drop the passive aggression, because we're going to Lyric's Lair, the darkest, edgiest level in the game. It's also the worst level in the game. And I'm just going to tell you straight up, no, I do not agree that this game is worse than Sonic 06, and I am so going to defend that opinion hardcore in the next part. See you then for that big discussion.